Michael's voice change, the medical truth behind the transformation. The music industry spent decades speculating about Michael Jackson's voice. Tabloids published wild theories. Fans debated endlessly. Medical experts were consulted on talk shows. But here's what most people don't know. The transformation everyone noticed wasn't just one thing. It was three separate medical events, each one building on the last, each one changing the instrument that created Thriller bad and dangerous. And there was one moment in 1984, one specific injury, that altered Michael Jackson's voice permanently. Most people think they know this story. They don't. Let me show you exactly what happened to the voice that defined a generation. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why Michael's later vocal style wasn't a choice, it was an adaptation. Let me paint the picture for you. In 1969, 11-year-old Michael Jackson walked into Motown Studio A with a voice that stopped Berry Gordy cold. This wasn't a child singer. This was a fully formed instrument with range, power, and emotional depth that shouldn't exist in a preteen body. The Jackson 5's first 4 singles all hit #1. Industry veterans said the same thing. That voice was a gift from God. But here's where it gets interesting. That gift had an expiration date built into its DNA. And Michael knew it. Now here's the kicker. Every male singer goes through puberty. Voices drop, ranges shift, it's biology. But Michael Jackson's voice change was different in 3 critical ways. First, his pre-puberty range was abnormally high, almost soprano. Second, his vocal technique as a child was completely unsustainable. He was singing with pure power, no breath control, constant strain. Third, and this is what nobody talks about, he entered puberty while performing 200+ shows a year. His voice was changing while he was using it professionally every single night. Berry Gordy's vocal coaches saw what was coming. In 1972, Michael was 13. His voice was starting to crack during recording sessions. Motown had a decision to make: rest their golden goose or keep pushing. They kept pushing. The Jackson 5 had 45 concert dates that summer alone. Michael's voice was breaking in real time. On stage, in front of thousands of people. Audio engineers from that era described nightmare sessions where Michael would nail a take, then his voice would crack on the next one, and they'd have to start over. But that's not all. Michael developed a coping mechanism that would define his entire vocal approach for the rest of his life. When his natural voice became unreliable, he learned to sing in a controlled head voice, a technique that kept his tone light, his pitch accurate, and his vocal cords less strained. Listen to Ben from 1972. That's not his full voice. That's Michael learning to work around the change. He was 14 years old, adapting in real time, creating the breathy, controlled tone that would become his signature. This is where it gets deeply personal. By 1978, Michael's voice had settled into its adult range. Off-the-wall sessions showed a mature instrument, still high, still agile, but with power in the lower register. Quincy Jones said Michael could do things in the studio that seemed physically impossible. Runs, ad-libs, layered harmonies that required absolute control. But here's what Quincy also said. Michael was obsessed with protecting his voice. He wouldn't talk for hours before recording. He'd drink specific teas. He treated his vocal cords like an athlete treats their knees. But wait. On January 27, 1984, everything changed. Michael was filming a Pepsi commercial at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. Pyrotechnics were supposed to go off as he descended a staircase. The timing was off. A magnesium flash bomb ignited 2 seconds early. Michael's hair caught fire. He suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns to his scalp. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The world saw the footage. The world saw the injury. But here's what the world didn't see: the aftermath that affected his voice forever. Dr. Stephen Hufflin, Michael's plastic surgeon, treated the burns. Multiple surgeries followed. Skin grafts, reconstructive work. Michael was prescribed heavy pain medication. The medication included opioids, standard protocol for severe burns at the time. But here's the medical reality nobody connected to his voice. Opioid pain medication causes dry mouth, reduces saliva production, and affects the mucous membranes in the throat. For a singer whose technique relied on precise vocal cord control, this was catastrophic. Michael started experiencing chronic throat dryness. He'd drink water constantly during recording sessions. Audio engineers noticed he needed more takes to get the same results. His voice tired faster. Bruce Swedian, who engineered Thriller and Bad, later said that post-1984, Michael's recording sessions required more vocal rest breaks. The breathy quality in his voice became more pronounced, not as a style choice, but as compensation for vocal cords that weren't lubricating naturally anymore. Here's what nobody tells you about those Bad album sessions in 1986 and 1987. Swedian had to completely restructure the recording schedule around Michael's voice. Morning sessions were out. Michael's throat needed hours to recover from sleep-induced dryness. They'd start at 2 p.m., after he'd been hydrating and doing vocal exercises for 4 hours. Between takes, Michael would use a humidifier in the vocal booth. The studio kept the temperature at exactly 72 degrees. Any warmer dried his throat, any cooler tightened his vocal cords. This level of environmental control wasn't necessary during the Thriller sessions 3 years earlier. But after the Pepsi accident, it became non-negotiable. Here's where it gets interesting. The pain medication created a secondary problem: dependency. Michael continued using prescription painkillers long after the burns healed. Not for the high, but because stopping caused withdrawal symptoms that affected his ability to perform. And those medications kept affecting his voice. Chronic dehydration, reduced vocal flexibility, the need to sing even more carefully, even more controlled. Now here's what most people miss. The vocal style everyone associates with Michael Jackson, the breathy he, the spoken word breaks, the airy high notes, that wasn't how he naturally sang as a young adult. Listen to Don't Stop Till You Get Enough from 1979. There's power there. There's chest voice. Compare that to Man in the Mirror from 1988, 4 years after the Pepsi accident. It's the same person, but the instrument has fundamentally changed. More air, less power, more control, less freedom. Let me break down exactly what happened to Michael's voice across 3 distinct phases. Phase 1, 1969 to 1975. The child prodigy voice, pure, powerful, unsustainable. Constant strain from performing while going through puberty. Vocal cords thickening while being used professionally. Development of head voice technique as compensation. Phase 2, 1975 to 1984. The mature instrument, adult vocal range established, exceptional control and technique. Quincy Jones era perfection. Obsessive protection and maintenance required. Phase 3, 1984 to 2009, the adapted voice. Chronic dryness from medication side effects, increased breathiness to protect damaged vocal ecology, reliance on studio techniques and layering, and the voice that defined his later career, not by choice, but by necessity. But that's not all. There's a third medical factor that affected Michael's voice that almost nobody discusses: lupus. In 1986, Michael was diagnosed with discoid lupus, an autoimmune condition that causes skin lesions and systemic inflammation. One of the less discussed symptoms of lupus is chronic inflammation of mucous membranes, including those in the throat and vocal tract. This compounded the existing issues from the medication: more dryness, more inflammation, more need for careful vocal management. Dr. Patrick Treacy, one of Michael's physicians in later years, confirmed that Michael dealt with chronic throat issues related to his autoimmune condition. He required specialized treatment to maintain vocal function. This wasn't public knowledge during Michael's life because he never wanted his medical conditions to overshadow his artistry. But the medical reality was clear. By the mid-1980s, Michael's voice required constant medical intervention just to function at a professional level. Think about what that actually looked like on a daily basis. Michael would wake up and immediately assess his throat. Too much inflammation meant canceling that day's studio session. His personal physician would examine his vocal cords using a laryngoscope before major performances. Anti-inflammatory medications became part of his pre-show routine. But here's the catch: those medications caused their own side effects. Some made him drowsy, affecting his performance energy. Others interacted with the pain medication he was still managing. His doctors were constantly balancing one treatment against another, trying to keep his voice functional without creating new problems. This wasn't occasional intervention. This was daily medical management just to do what he'd done effortlessly as a teenager. Here's exactly how that matters. When people say Michael's voice got softer or became more breathy in his later years, they're describing a medical adaptation, not an artistic choice. The voice on Dangerous, History, and Invincible is Michael working around multiple chronic conditions, burn injury aftermath, medication side effects, and autoimmune disease, all while maintaining a career that demanded vocal perfection. This brings us to the moment that proves everything. In 2001, during the 30th anniversary special at Madison Square Garden, Michael performed The Way You Make Me Feel. Audio engineers who worked that show later described what happened backstage. Michael did extensive vocal warm-ups 2 hours before going on stage. He used a nebulizer to moisturize his vocal tract. He worked with a vocal coach on breath support techniques, and when he hit the stage, he delivered. But listen closely to the performance. The power notes are there, but they're short. The sustained notes are breathy. The ad-libs are controlled, never pushed. That's not artistic restraint. That's medical management in real time. That was the moment the industry insiders understood. This wasn't the same instrument that recorded off the wall. This was a rebuilt voice, maintained through discipline, technique, and medical intervention. The fact that Michael could still perform at that level, 20 years after the Pepsi accident, 15 years into managing lupus, is actually more impressive than his early effortless power. Now, here's where it gets even better. The final validation came from the one person whose opinion mattered most. Dr. Neil Ratner, Michael's tour physician during the History World Tour, was asked about Michael's voice in a later interview. He confirmed everything: the chronic dryness, the inflammation management, the careful scheduling of performances to allow for vocal recovery. He said something that really stuck. He said Michael's voice was like an elite athlete's knees after years of competition. It still worked, but it required constant maintenance, and the natural ability had to be supplemented with technique and medical support. Think about what that means. Michael Jackson performed at the highest level for 40 years, with a voice that, medically speaking, should have failed decades earlier. The fact that he adapted, that he rebuilt his technique around his limitations, that he created a signature sound from what was actually compensation, that's the story nobody tells. Let me break down what an outside observer, no matter how knowledgeable, could never fully understand about Michael's voice transformation. They could never know the physical pain of performing with chronic throat inflammation. Michael pushed through it every single show. They could never know the psychological burden of losing your natural instrument. Michael's identity was his voice. Watching it change was traumatic. They could never know the discipline required to adapt. Every note after 1984 was calculated, controlled, protected. They could never know the medical interventions happening behind the scenes. Nebulizers, throat treatments, vocal rest protocols. They could never know the fear before every performance. Will the voice hold? Will it crack? Will it fail? And they could never know what it took to make it sound effortless. The audience heard perfection. Michael felt the struggle. Here's exactly how to think about it. Most singers lose their voice and retire. Michael lost his voice and rebuilt it. There's a fundamental difference. The voice everyone knows from Thriller to Invincible isn't one voice. It's 3 distinct instruments, each one adapted to medical realities that would have ended most careers. After searching for answers in tabloid theories and fan speculation, the truth was always in the medical records, in the engineer testimonies, in the physician accounts. The Pepsi accident in 1984 created a cascade of medical issues that permanently altered Michael Jackson's vocal ecology. The lupus diagnosis in 1986 compounded those issues, and the pain medication required for both conditions created chronic side effects that required constant management. So remember that moment in 1984, the one that changed everything. It was when Michael's hair caught fire, when the burns required medication, when the medication began affecting his throat, when his voice began requiring medical intervention just to function. That's when the transformation truly began. The world saw a celebrity accident. The medical reality was the beginning of a 40-year vocal adaptation. Michael Jackson's voice didn't just change. It was rebuilt, maintained, and protected through sheer discipline and medical science. The breathy, controlled, careful instrument of his later years wasn't a stylistic choice, it was survival. And the fact that he made it sound like art, that he turned medical limitation into signature sound, that's the real story. So, there you have it, the medical truth behind Michael Jackson's voice transformation. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.